Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance in the Crawlspace studios in Wormtown. Lance, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you today?
I'm doing all right.
Good.
So yesterday, Lance marked 15 years missing for Brianna Maitland. And that was March 19th, 2019. And so in this interview today, Lance, I guess it's really more of a conversation that we have with two private investigators on this case, Lou Barry and Greg Overacker. They've both been in studio before separately, but now we have them here together in an episode that is nothing less than kind of eye-opening.
It's really cool to watch the dynamic between the two because you have Greg Overacker, who is a licensed private investigator. He's also a bounty hunter, which his history is amazing. If you'd ever, we've had a chance to speak to him aside from the topic of Brianna, and he's so experienced in just the world that a lot of us don't even think about. There's this sort of underbelly that Greg Overacker is a part of, and he tries his best to implement justice when he sees fit. And then you compare that to Lou. And Lou's been in law enforcement for over 30 years. He's been amongst the highest ranks of police officers, and they have come together. Greg with his experience of 14 years on Brianna's case and Lou's experience of 2 or 3 years. Very, very fascinating to watch these two who want the same goal. They have different paths that got them there. It's very cool to watch those two come together and interact.
Agree. It's kind of a dream team. And this is probably a good time to mention PIs for the missing, Lance. And last week I got the URL wrong.
How dare you?
I know, right? It's actually investigationsforthemissing.org. And can you please tell us about it?
Investigationsforthemissing.org is a foundation, a nonprofit organization that was founded by Brianna's father, Bruce Maitland. And Bruce wanted to give back. He wanted to provide a service to the community that didn't directly involve his daughter, but he wanted it to be because of his experience with his daughter and the investigation into her disappearance. So what it does is provides the resources and the funds to hire somebody like Greg Overacker to investigate an unsolved cold case, whether it's a disappearance or an unsolved murder or anything that a family would need when the resources of law enforcement have run out and they need to hire somebody who's private, and that is incredibly expensive. There's a GoFundMe link on the page at investigationsforthemissing.org. Give as much as you can. Every little bit helps, and we're making a bigger push to get more official type grants. You and I are on the board. There's also other members of the board. Shout out to Michelle for helping out with a lot of the legalities and I guess just being a really good spokesperson for it and reaching out to many organizations and helping us interact with family members who have asked for the services.
So check out investigationsforthemissing.org, and Bruce is trying to bring the operation to CrimeCon in June in New Orleans, Lance, and maybe he'll have a booth down there and you can talk to Bruce in person about this organization. And if he is down there, we are going to have him on a panel, Crawlspace live show, Lance, right down there in New Orleans.
When we brought up CrimeCon to Bruce, he was a little hesitant at first because he's a pretty private man. He does want all the information out there as far as Brianna's disappearance and as far as getting the word out there for investigations for the missing, but he doesn't like being in the spotlight. So at first he was thinking CrimeCon, he doesn't want to be in the spotlight, but when we started talking to him about it and he looked into CrimeCon, this is the exact people, the people who go to CrimeCon, you listeners out there who go to CrimeCon, you are the people that Bruce wants to talk to when it comes to investigations for the missing. You are passionate enough about this to go to New Orleans or to go to Indianapolis or to go to Nashville. Like, if this is your third one, you will love what Bruce is doing with investigations for the missing.
Yeah, so join us down there at CrimeCon in New Orleans and use code CrawlSpace19 when you check out on CrimeCon's site. You'll get 10% off your standard registration badge.
Perfect. And we're traveling a lot in the upcoming weeks. It's going to be a busy spring and summer.
Seriously, we're going in April to the American Investigative Society of Cold Cases, which is called ASOC. And on April 15th and 16th, this conference is happening at the College of St. Rose in Albany, New York. And we are speaking on April 16th at 9:20 a.m. A bit early in the morning for me, but we'll be fine. We'll be caffeinated
especially on
up.
day 2.
But we'll be speaking with Mike Morford and John Lorden.
And I fully expect that conversation to not only be insightful and fascinating and something that you can take a lot from in regards to what we do as true crime podcasters, but also the relationship between the family, the media, and law enforcement in the true crime community. There might even be a big break that Mike Morford and John Lorden will be talking about with one of their cases that we covered on Crawlspace as well.
Well, actually,
now that you mention it.
Now that you mentioned it, Lance, this past weekend, there was some news in the case that we covered with those guys called Double Murder in Ozark. It was the murder of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett, and they arrested someone named Coley McCraney in this double murder, and he's been charged with 5 counts of capital murder, Lance.
So once again, Mike Morford comes out of the shadows,
he's
nabs him,
a
nabs
good luck
perp.
charm.
Yeah, he really is.
He's becoming a podcast folk hero, and apparently, Lance, what happened was him and his team, John Lorden and Gray Hughes, they contacted Parabon who about this case, about this double murder in the hopes of trying to acquire some DNA so they could move this forward. Well, Parabon contacted the Ozark police, and they made this connection of DNA, and it came together to make an arrest, Lance. So
amazing.
They had barely started their podcast, and this case is solved.
So Parabon is a company that engineers DNA, correct?
Something, yeah. They're involved in DNA and forensic testing, and they were able to reach out and sort of bring this case home together, Lance. Pretty impressive work by the boys, the 3 men and a mystery. And again, it's so strange because the podcast had barely started. So the police department in Ozark, they somehow got wind that this media attention was going to be renewed on their case, and they got to work and solve this case.
Well, excellent work by the team over there at 3 Men and a Mystery. Excellent work at Parabon, and excellent work by the police force for accepting this information. And it is really the prime example of what to do when you've put yourself in the position that we've put ourselves in, and Mike Morford, Gray Hughes, and John Lorden have put themselves in the position. They knew the right thing to do. They did it the responsible way, and look what's happened.
Yeah, so that conference with them, that panel with Mike Morford and John Lorden is going to be extra interesting now. So get your tickets at AISOC.com. That's AISOCC.com.
And I just want to thank the sponsors for making this show possible. Who do we have here?
We have Cavo, The Real, and Madison Reed. So thanks a lot. We really appreciate your sponsorship, and listeners at home, check them out. They're great companies. And Lance, last Wednesday, we were a part of this Science Cafe forensic panel up in Nashua, New Hampshire at the Riverwalk Cafe, and what a time we had.
Yeah, I learned so much, and it was really humbling to be sitting there with law enforcement, FBI, digital forensic experts, and the audience was just amazing. The questions from the audience were questions that I think you and I both had for these people as well, and they did their best to work us into it. We were sort of the media end of it, and we were a little bit intimidated, I think, just being
just a little
amongst that group of people there.
Yeah, but it was a great night, and we'd love to attend more of those. So shout out to Steve, the owner, and Scott and Sandra for putting it together. That was really great to invite us, and we got to chat with them a little bit after, and that was really cool.
And shout out to all the people that attended. Hope you all had a good time. By the way, the food at that place is very, very good, and the drinks are very tasty, and the employees are just wonderful.
And shout out to George, who we met, who's a big Crawlspace fan. George was great to talk to during the panel and afterwards. And afterwards, he was like, "Tim, I think you smell like weed a little bit." And I I was like, "George, we talked before the show. If I smelled like weed, I would have hoped you told me before I sat next to 3 law enforcement officers." But I think that was the musicians who walked in for open mic right after us, and they were sitting right near where we were talking.
Probably was just a coincidence then. And a shout out to the bearded guy who, I'm so sorry, I can't remember your name, but you and your girlfriend said you loved our ad. So shout out to you two. You were there as well, and great questions that came from you guys as well.
Okay, so check out this episode. Enjoy it, please. We have Lou Barry and Greg Overacker here, and subscribe to this show on Stitcher. And of course, you can get our entire ad-free catalog on Stitcher Premium at stitcherpremium.com and use code Crawlspace for a free month. Oh, and let me just tell you, the second half of this interview, this conversation, Lance, with Lou and Greg, is going to be available exclusively on YouTube, our YouTube page at youtube.com/crawlspace.
We're literally all over the place.
We really are. And so check us out on Twitter, Crawlspace Pod. We're on Instagram and Facebook at Crawlspace Podcast. Thank you very much. Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim. We are here today with Lance, as always, but in the Crawlspace studios with private investigators and friends, Greg Overacker and Lou Barry. How are you guys?
Good.
Yeah, great.
It's good to have you guys in the studio. We're really reaching capacity here in our 10 by 10 box, but we appreciate it because we want to talk about Brianna a little bit more, and having you two together discussing any new developments or going over the questions that Chloe actually assembled for us from people in the public who really have these questions that we need to they want addressed.
Yeah, shout out to Chloe. Thanks, big thanks to her for putting together these questions in this document. And the listeners out there responded. So if you don't mind, we'll just get right into it.
I just want to ask them real quick, for my personal curiosity and for the listeners' sake, how long have each one of you respectively been working on Brianna's case?
Since 2006.
Yeah, I've been on about 2.5 years now.
Okay, cool. Since 2006?
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was more than 10 years for you.
Yeah.
Damn, okay.
Yep.
Okay, so first question here we got from the listeners, from Brenna. She says, is there any possibility this was a random act, or are we confident Bree disappeared as a result of someone known to her? And if so, are the police and family certain they know who it was?
You know that your feelings about that kind of ebb and sway as you get more information and as time goes on and you discuss it more with different people. And because we heard rumors and chased those down in the talk amongst locals, it always went back to zero, or it always seemed to go back to zero. You know, if you're familiar with the story, you know that there was mentions of overdosing at a party and things like that. And no one could ever tell us the party, where it was at, who was there. But they'd say, I heard it from so-and-so, and you go to that person. They'd say, I heard it from so-and-so, and you go to that person, and it goes back to zero. So the talk would be amongst Bruce and I and amongst Lou and I was that we wondered if we would ever come up with someone who was totally off the grid. And oddly enough, Lou got a tip recently pertaining to someone that we had never heard of before.
Yeah, and I think that shows the importance of keeping this active. And Chloe running her blog and you guys doing a podcast and the web pages and all keeps the interest up in this. Just last summer, we got a brand new suspect, totally off the radar. As time went by, it developed into something that looks pretty viable. It's been turned over to the state police. They're working on it. How far it'll go, I don't know. But, at least people are still interested in still – there's still information out there. It shows that, there's still information out there.
It's amazing that a guy that interesting would be there among the locals, and we had never heard of it.
Yeah.
And interesting guy, to say the least, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no question he's a viable suspect. Whether or not he's involved remains to be seen. But it's certainly enough there that he should be taking a close look at. But interestingly, I mean, back to her question, I guess, we have no idea. It could be, you just don't know until you solve it. You don't know. Anything is possible.
And they're following up on that.
They're currently following up on that, Vermont
as we
State
speak.
Police. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And this wasn't somebody who was a local?
He was, but he was a transplant, correct? He had lived in Burlington. He had moved to Florida.
Moved around a lot.
Yeah, he'd come back up into the area, and then he'd lived in that area, right close by, and was there during that time frame.
You have a history of violent crime?
Yeah, without getting into too much.
Okay.
There's enough there that I think shows that he should be looked at.
Yeah.
And is being looked at. So.
Great. Wow. Okay.
You said, Greg, that you got leads and they always go back to zero. Are you just saying that most of the leads that you followed up with go back to nothing. They
Well,
just don't lead anywhere.
Those rumors, you know what I mean? The rumor mill.
Mm-hmm.
And that was huge. You know, when I came in 06, and you know, we talked about this when I sat down with the Maitlands, it was just a huge amount of information to soak up. Your head's spinning by the time you're done. Kelly literally had boxes and boxes of information. And so you start chasing down these stories. Of course, the big one was the overdosing at a party that we heard. So you start going from person to person to person to try to chase that down to zero, and you just can't. It ends, and it goes nowhere. And you just feel like you're constantly on that treadmill. But that's come up with a lot of the different stories. No one can get it back to zero.
Right. It's just the amount of information is incredible that Greg developed long before I got involved. And when I first sat down with Greg, my head was spinning because trying to keep track of this one and that one. And, you know, I think I have a list of like 120 names of people that are involved, either by giving information or something. And I gave up because it was just getting too massive. And
I was so happy to have you on board, but I'm like, okay, here we go. This is going to take a week or two, you know?
I think it took 6 months for me to actually get in my mind who was who.
Yeah.
And
the big cast of characters.
Yeah, the cast of characters, you know, how they had, what their involvement was. And
the odd thing is when we talked about people lying too, whether they do it purposely or not, or they're just mistaken, that's just can drain you. I mean, and we can't figure it out why people would say the things that they say. I mean, one person will literally say something horrible about another person. You go back to that person and say, I don't know what you're talking about. And honestly, I don't know what you're talking about. You go back to that person, they change their story, and it just gets really difficult.
There's a question here from Caitlin. I want to know about the DNA found in the car. Was it blood or a different bodily fluid? Do we know if it has been tested? I know the police said they found DNA. Not sure if the PIs would have any info on this.
Well, the Vermont State Police came out and said they found DNA in the car. And if you look at some of the pictures, you can see where swaths of upholstery have been taken off. So assumably that's where the DNA is. They've, to my knowledge, never publicly said, is it blood? Is it some other bodily fluid? And to be honest with you, the fact that there's DNA in the car may or may not mean anything. I mean, everywhere you go, you leave DNA. Now, certainly, DNA can be valuable, particularly if it's found on a body or at a murder scene. But where you have a vehicle, who knows how many people have been in and out of that vehicle, the presence of their DNA may or may not mean anything. So as far as I know, they said they have it. That's, I think, all that's public knows. And
I think it's safe to say, though, that it's not DNA taken from a massive amount of, like, say, blood that stained the back seat.
So it's not DNA that we know is the person that took her or whatever, or we don't know?
We don't know.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is it may or may not mean anything. If it were to belong to someone she was acquainted with that would have a legitimate reason for being in the vehicle, it would basically be not very important. If it belongs to someone who claims that they have no knowledge of her and they've never been in her car, well, then it could be extremely important. Right. So I guess until you know who it belongs to, the relative value of that is unknown.
Okay. Here's a question from Matthew. He says, I'm wondering if you guys have personally talked to Street and Low, which are, of course, sort of code names, I guess, for...
the street names.
Yeah, for Ramon Ryans and Nathaniel Jackson.
Yeah. No, I wanted to. I was told not to every time I kind of approached it. And for different reasons at different times.
Who told you not to?
Bruce, through the police, not to touch it. For different reasons. You know, back in the beginning, they were still being talked to. Ryans was pulled in at one point and given a polygraph. And we kind of just, you know, and we get what they give us.
A polygraph specifically about Brianna?
I believe so, yeah. And, you know, we're told it's inconclusive because we're not given, you know, it's not a two-way street. We share, we give them everything. They give us what they want to give us. So, and that's kind of the way it works. You just kind of do what you can do with that. But, different times for different reasons that we were told not to. And Jackson was in prison for 8 years. I think it was 8 years, something like that, for cocaine trafficking. He got picked up down south. I think he just got out recently.
August of 17.
Yeah.
Actually, I had a brief conversation with Lo. I don't think I ever told you this either.
No.
Breaking news.
Not real valuable conversation. What his response to my question probably shouldn't go on the air. So,
What was your question?
I don't remember the exact words. Something to do with Vermont.
Did it sound like a phone hanging out?
No,
Is that his reply?
it was an online conversation.
Oh.
Okay. So you communicated with him online, and you said it was Lo?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
which one is Lo? Lo is Jackson?
no, excuse me. I take that back. It was Ramon.
You know, they were a lot of people go crazy with that for a couple of reasons, and maybe rightfully so. When Hank Albarelli wrote the couple of articles there, which were great articles and really informative, and that's how that whole story led down to Ryan's being in Burlington and Ellen Ducharme killing Legia Collins and all that stuff. So that got people kind of fixated on those guys. And then when the show came out,
Yeah, the disappeared episode.
yeah, they concentrated on that for whatever reason. I mean, it was a good show and it was informative and everything, but they didn't kind of leave that out. They didn't leave that out as kind of other options. They kind of put that in, focused on it.
Yeah.
So people kind of focus in on them, but there's nothing directly to relate them. Of course, the kids there will tell you. Just to give you a lot of information about them and stuff. So they should obviously be looked at.
Well, they make the class a suspect. They're not from around there. They're different. They're from a different culture. They're involved in drug trafficking, among other things. So, they're a natural suspect, I guess.
Yeah, they went and camped out in that area specifically just to sell drugs. There's no other reason. They don't have any family there. They don't have friends there. They went up to a place where there's little police enforcement, There's no police forces. That's all state trooper area.
State,
right?
deputy sheriffs.
It's very thin, very sparse.
And you're talking about the town of Montgomery?
That whole area.
The whole area?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's just not a police force there. I mean, in state police, I mean, at times I've driven from the bottom of Vermont all the way up to the Canadian border and back. I saw two cops on the road, one a trooper and one a town cop in Rutland on my trip. So, I mean, there's just not a huge police presence. So they went up there and were dealing, of course, Burlington was a hub on the way. And when this all came to be, Ryan's moved back to Burlington and set up shop. And that's when he reported Legia missing. I don't know if that's just bad luck or the line of work he's in, but here he's, around Brianna that goes missing, and then he goes down into Burlington and his girlfriend gets murdered, and he reports her missing. Of course, he had nothing to do with that, but she was selling cocaine for him. Mm-hmm. She goes out to deliver cocaine and gets killed. And he reports her missing. But
what did you mean when you talk to the kids up there that they'll all tell you?
Bri's friends?
They don't have anything nice to say about those guys.
You're talking about Brianna's friends?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Anybody up there that was, all the kids got mixed up in doing drugs up there. It was just a plague at the time, a crack explosion at the time. And we talked about this on the drive out. It ruined a bunch of kids. But they'll all tell you stories about them because they knew them. They were around, and they weren't hard to pick out, and not to sound racist or anything, but they were the only two black guys, obvious who they were. You could pick them out. They weren't from there, and so everybody knew them.
So some of this question goes on and asks about a possible drug debt that Brianna had. I know that's kind of like an old rumor. And just curious about that. And I guess this question kind of gets specifically to asking Lou, but keep it open to Greg too, is talking about, like, is a drug more to blame? Like, for example, pot versus cocaine. If she owed a debt for pot, like, is she going to get involved with anything violent as opposed to a different drug? And does that even make sense anyway?
Well, it doesn't really. I think no matter excuse me, what drug she or anyone happened to be using, in particular her, she's not going to bring up enough of a drug debt to warrant getting killed for. I mean, realistically, if someone owes you drug money, the last thing you want to do is kill them because you're never going to collect. And if you do kill them, it's going to be public enough that word gets out so that other people know, don't mess with this guy. They're going to pay or you're going to pay your debt, so you're going to get hurt. So in this particular case, it doesn't make sense at all that she would be someone would kill her for a drug debt. I can't believe at her age and her lifestyle she's used enough drugs to owe enough people enough money to make that worthwhile. Now, I will say this, though. Given the history of some of the people involved that were rumored to be or known to be trafficking in females potentially, that's an option that perhaps if there was some money owed, they saw this girl, she's very susceptible to, because of her lifestyle, not living at home and things like that, susceptible to maybe being taken advantage of.
And her personal involvement with them.
Well, yeah. Having
that's kind of a combination there, yeah.
And from there, who knows? I mean, she could have, as the rumor goes, had a accidental drug overdose. She could have resisted, and inadvertently something happened to her. I think you can speculate forever on what could have happened, but that I think is a much more realistic possibility than someone did her in because she owed them drug money.
The beginning part of this question from Jen, she wants to understand if either or both believe whomever was involved in Brianna's disappearance was not a patron that night at the inn, and how they came to that conclusion. And what stood out to me here was that, in parentheses, she says, we want to learn critical thinking from the experts.
I'm no expert.
Stop it.
We talked about this when a new suspect came up. All along, we've been looking at it from the perspective of someone she was acquainted with, and that's obviously still a possibility. But she had just started working there. This was like her second week. And the note that she left that day for Jillian indicated she had no idea what time she was getting out of work, anywhere from 10 to midnight. Now, I've talked to the former owner of the Black Lantern, and he said that the dishwashers, that's what she did, had no set schedule as far as when they left work because it depends how busy they were. So she could have gone anywhere from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So for someone... So she didn't even know her schedule. Now, very few of her friends that we're aware of knew she was even working there because she was on the outs because of that whole incident with Keeley and the whole fight over the boyfriend and all that. With the group that she had been associating with. So her circle of friends at this point was fairly limited. So how many of those people knew she was working that night and getting out at that hour is a small group. Which leads you back to the Black Lantern, because a customer would have known that she was working and maybe roughly what time they got out. So it almost tends to bring focus back towards the Lantern and away from her friends in St. Albans and Enosburg and all of that. But that's, again, speculation. But now, at one time we were told, or in fact we have been told, that this new suspect did frequent the Black Lantern. How much and when, we don't know.
There was actually a guy who was there that night who he was staying at the inn, and he was up there for, it was a ski trip or something. But he was vacationing alone, and I interviewed him, and the state police interviewed him, and it was a very odd thing. I don't know anybody that vacations alone. He just said he couldn't get some friends to go with him, so he ended up going by himself. He'd gone up there, a dozen times before. But the state police feel confident that he's not involved. And we've got all the phone records from the inn, and they've been traced. So that led nowhere. And she didn't have a cell phone that night, well, that we know of.
Well, I was told she did not have one, and there's no cell service anyways. So it doesn't kind of matter, but so it's possible. I don't think it was any patron that was there that night because the owner's wife saw her get in the car and leave. I think she would have seen anyone leaving after her. So
getting into her own car and leaving.
Brianna.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. She saw her leave the parking lot, and I'm sure had someone driven out right after her, she would have mentioned that.
And there was always those thoughts of somebody was in the back seat and stuff like that. You get into those, and you always look at all the possibilities. But if you look at a possibility like that, can it happen? Yeah, but if somebody's going to abduct somebody and she's tearing down the road at 50 miles an hour, he's going to pack up from the pop up from the back seat and attack her. That's kind of you don't have
Well,
very
that's
much.
what happens in movies.
Yeah, that's what happens. You don't have very much control over anything when that happens.
You're not going to back into a house.
Yeah, and then what's he going to do with her? It's cold and it's dark,
and he has no car.
And he's going to walk her somewhere. Exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It would have to involve a third party that would follow along afterwards, and it gets involved. And there we go with Occam's razor again. It's
You're just complicating it.
Yeah.
Choose the simplest. Normally it's the simplest solution, and that's just not one of them.
Yeah.
But that was one that came up all the time. People would say, "Well, somebody was in her back seat."
I'm curious about the phone records. You said that you checked out the phone records of the Black Lantern.
I traced all that I could.
How long after the disappearance did you look at their phone records?
Bruce gave them to me when I came in 06.
In 06.
And I traced what I could.
So just a couple of years.
And I believe the police had already had them, and the ones that I couldn't trace, they did.
And nothing was led. And this was from like a work phone?
Average local folks. It was the business landline.
Okay.
And, you would think if a dishwasher got a phone call that night, someone would have said.
Someone would have known.
She got a phone
There
call.
wasn't many calls.
Absolutely.
I mean, there was,
Yep.
I'm just going to guess because I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's in that booklet I gave you on the way out, Lou. But it was like, 18 calls or something, and they were people calling for reservations and stuff like that.
Yep.
At least the ones that I don't know, the ones that the police traced, they didn't give me that information. Again, not a two-way street. They don't give us information.
Right.
But, or not much anyway. They give us information when they don't want us to talk about something. That's the information. Don't talk about this or that.
How about this one from Amanda? To what extent is this a case of the police know who is responsible but don't have the evidence to bring it to the DA?
They don't.
No, they don't. This is actively being investigated. If they knew for certain who did it, their focus would be entirely on that, and it's not, as far as I know. Again, we don't have privy to what they know. We're not privy to that, but I can't believe that's the case.
There's something to be said, and they'll disagree with us, and they may even deny it, but a lot of what they have came from us.
And I think Mr. Maitland is in very close contact with them, and I can't believe that they would have a strong suspect and not have told him, hey, look, this is, where we're looking.
Right, not specifically who, but at least like, here's some hope for you. Here's a suspect.
Exactly.
Often what they'll do, too, is when they finish something, they'll wait till even if it takes months and months, when they finish it, they'll call him and
this is what we
give him all the information. They won't tell him when it's going on because they're working it and they don't want to. I don't think they want us to know.
Well, it's understandable. They're doing a criminal investigation, and we're not police officers. So, even though our loyalty is Mr. Maitland, and theirs is to the people in Vermont.
And they don't want anything leaking out and backdooring them.
Yeah.
Here's one from Melissa. Did they ever find out what caused the fire? I take it she means the Dutch burn?
The Dutch burn home?
Yeah.
I think that was just some kids, right?
Some kids said it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they were caught.
Unrelated.
Yeah,
they were just burning down an old building. Over the time you get different information and you realize you said something wrong or your feelings about something change because you get more information. So it's constantly changing. We talked about the Dutch burn home, and I remember I had told you the two brothers that lived there, the guys came and did a home invasion and that they had gone into a nursing home. It was really sad and they had never come home. That's not true.
They moved back in.
They moved back into the house.
Wow.
Yeah, they did. And they were both of them did, correct?
I believe so. I don't know for how long because I know they were out there. They wouldn't answer, knock at the door.
There's actually a well-written article that and that might be in that packet too, that you can find online about it. And they were just kind of, didn't live. It's like the story of people who live with their doors unlocked all the time, and something traumatic happens, and now they're shuttering all their doors, and they won't answer the door and stuff like that. That was kind of the effect, and I thought it odd that everybody knew that these guys carried cash.
Yeah.
In their overalls, they had wads of cash.
Yep.
The farmers, it's you don't trust the banks kind of thing. So when the guys that robbed them went to spend the money, it smelled
like the barn.
It smelled like the barn. That's how that's literally how they caught him. Everybody, and then it's such a small area, and everybody knows everybody, that everybody knew what had happened, And this guy came into was it a hardware store or something? And he was going to buy something. And
Lumber yard or something.
Yeah, and the money smelled like manure. And they're like, and that's how they caught him.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the way it works.
When you think about it, you think about the state of Vermont, and in this one spot, you have these two tragedies that happen years apart in the exact spot. I mean, what a crazy coincidence.
And then you can add the fire as like the final sort of tragedy. Because now it's not there. You can't go.
It's been torn down.
Yeah.
Even the foundation's gone now.
Yeah, there's no. That's so creepy to think of. There's no evidence of any.
The law of truly large numbers.
Say that again?
The law of truly large numbers. That odd things will happen that you can't predict.
Yeah.
Really odd things. You can only see them in hindsight. But yeah, it is, especially something that tragic.
Speaking of that, residence.
This is a good question.
Yeah, where is the nearest residence besides that, the Dutchburn house? Where's the nearest residence to the crash site, and is it close enough for someone to have heard the car hit the house and perhaps seen a glimpse of what unfolded?
Because I think, not to interrupt, I think that a lot of people out there will look at the picture of the car backed into the house, but you don't get a look at the surrounding area.
I actually have photos that actually shows the Dutchburn home at a distance. That's in that package.
591 feet to answer the question.
Is that the exact answer?
Yeah.
Really?
To the next house,
To the next house, the closest
590.
one.
So that's like
almost 2 football fields.
2 football fields.
You measured it to the foot? 593
Online,
feet?
yeah.
Oh, online. I thought he was out there with one of those little things they do with car accidents.
Yeah,
you know,
a little ticker.
So it's pretty distant when you think about it. And then the next two are like 600 yards away, 500 yards away. So there's.
Bruce said that one person did say they had heard a noise,
they
but they
thought
didn't know
they
what
heard
it was.
a scream, and
just went back to bed.
I mean, up there you hear animals all the time.
Yeah.
I think it's wintertime. The windows are all shut.
When you think about Maura's situation and Brianna's situation too, at that hour of the night, if there's no moonlight, you can't see your hand in front of your face.
No streetlights up there.
Yeah, it's dark.
And just to be clear, there was nobody living in the Dutchburn when she hit it.
No, it was vacant
No, it was
building.
boarded up.
Had been
Boarded
for
up.
years.
Yeah, it had been for quite some time. Yeah, and that's why there's always a lot of rumors going around that it was a party spot for the kids, and that's one of the first questions we asked our friends. You guys go to the party? It was like, no, why do we go there? It's like right on the road.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
If you were took this shack up as a place to party and the cops pulled up, there'd be nowhere to go. It's all open field around it,
And they'd
would
see
be
the
trapped.
cars parked there.
Yeah, and it literally the road whizzes right past.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think we just, I know I lose sight of the fact that we get so caught up in this that there could be people listening thinking, well, who was home at the time?
The pictures are deceiving too.
Pictures are deceiving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when I first read this years and years and years ago. In your mind, you picture it, and I had pictured her back off the road down maybe a little lane where no one could see the car type thing. And then when I actually saw it, wow,
it's literally almost like it's on display. The way the road kind of curves around.
There's nothing else.
Yeah.
It's just right in the middle of the.
That's to me. It made sense that, of course, I'm not from there, and I may have a different point of view if I was from there, but it literally seemed like this would be a good meeting spot if you're on your way home. Somebody, well, just meet me there. I got to give you something, or I want to talk to you. Boom, you'd pull in there, and the people that lived there, you could just, if you're coming the other way, the way Brianna was, you would just cross over traffic and pull off on this even grade.
There's a pull off, in fact.
Yeah.
There's a little.
It almost looks as though she came over and she crossed the oncoming traffic and just pulled along the side of the road. And if somebody was coming the other way to meet her, they would have been bumper to bumper, facing each other. And that's what I thought, because if she had to leave, she's got to go in reverse to get out of there, and she would hit that building. I, being a more experienced driver, would put my ass into my car up on the road, But she's not going to do that. She's going to do a 3-pointer. But it's still weird.
Bruce says that when he was at the scene, of course, the scene had been contaminated, obviously, with traffic and everything, but that he could see tire marks in the field. You know how you see like the grass is kind of matted, leading about 100 feet past the Dutchburn house right up to where her car was. So it would indicate that in her car, there's a curve there. And when you turn your wheel, obviously you turn the curve, your wheels are going to turn. And if she had stopped suddenly and then thrown it in reverse, her wheels are still cocked. she's going to go directly back into that house.
That's always what I thought, that I thought if she met someone there like that, and they're bumper to bumper, and she's either behind the wheel, or when we were kids and we would go out and have beers in the country roads or something, we would get out, leave the window down, crank up the radio in the heat, go out and sit outside the car for a while and talk. If we got cold, we'd jump back in the car or whatever. So if she was meeting someone and a confrontation started outside the vehicle, or if she was already in the vehicle, and she's got to get out of there. There's only one way to take that big boat of a car. I mean, that car was huge. She's got to go back. And if she went back, she'd do that 3-point turn, and she'd hit that building. And if you look at the pictures that are from the front of looking at the front of the vehicle, her wheels are turned hard, real hard. I mean, she's trying to, whoever hit it was turned really hard
to make it turn and get out of there. And the thing is, though, if she was meeting someone, there's a pull-off in front of the house.
That doesn't make sense.
Hard gravel. That's where they would have parked. They wouldn't have driven up into the field.
That's what always threw me, threw my
I think she backed up trying to get away from something, someone.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so Bruce said that he saw tire tracks in the grass, and that would have been potentially from Brianna backing up for about 100 feet, was it?
I think it was about 100 feet,
Wow.
yeah. And you can see, I mean, he showed me the spot on the map where it looked like, it was, guess 100 feet, maybe not that far.
So I mean, if you buy into that theory that someone was in the back seat and she pulls off the road there and she puts it into reverse, I mean, I'm not going to get into that, but he thought they were her tracks, though not a car that met her.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
and I've talked about this dozens of times, and I'm still not clear on it completely.
I think it's still speculation.
Yeah.
That's what I got out of it. And when like I said, the way her wheels would have had to been turned to maneuver the corner or the curve, if they were still turned that way, and you just all of a sudden throw it in reverse and don't straighten your wheels up, you're going to back up right into that house.
Yeah, and then the car sits with the wheel turning real hard. I was always curious what gear the car was in. Of course, you're never going to know because they towed it away. It seems, you're the 35-year veteran cop. It seems really bizarro to me that a cop would pull up, see the car backed in this building. It's a clip off the road. That's where the pictures get deceiving. It's a ways off the road. Yeah. It's pretty furiously backed into it and hung up on the foundation. And there's water bottle and stuff like that, and supposedly change and stuff like that, a broken necklace on the ground and stuff. And he goes, all right, towed away. I would think this is odd. A drunk driver would go off the road and hit something. They're not going to back up, 150 feet or 100 feet and smack a house. I just think that's the strangest thing, that they would just tow it away. But because of that, we don't know what gear it was in. You're thinking, well, if she's pulled out of the car in haste, which it seems as though lights are on, stuff like that it would still be in reverse. Now, she's not going to hit the house, or she may put it into drive.
Maybe put it into drive.
Yeah. But it's just not going to be in park.
Unless somebody did something to her that rendered her unconscious, and then they were able to just go in and change the gear.
Well, there was a time when we thought it was a red herring that somebody put the car there. I had statements that said, I was told by my boyfriend they put the car there, and she pointed at her boyfriend. I went to talk to this girl. This girl was crying her eyes out. She never thought I'd just show up on her doorstep, and this was years later, crying her eyes out, her and her father, and she said, that's what he told me. I swear that's what he told me. He ditched the car there, put her somewhere else. So you don't know what to think. Is it a red herring that they just put it there? But if he did, why the odd position and backing it in? And we don't, you would want to know where the seat position was if he's a big guy and all that stuff. We don't know any of that because they towed the car away.
What also doesn't make any sense, if something happened to her, or you did something to her and you're trying to cover it up, you hide the car where nobody's going to find it right away. You don't leave it right out in the open where somebody's going to say, oh, my God, what happened? And start looking for her. That doesn't make any sense.
Because clearly something's wrong. When you look at the car in the back of the back of the car's in the house, there's clearly something wrong.
Just to comment on what you said about the drunk drivers before, I've seen some pretty strange things with drunk drivers that you would never think.
Yeah?
Yeah. So I...
Got a good one? Give us a good one.
I saw a woman drove over a retaining wall one day, so her car was hung up half on and half off.
Stuff you wouldn't imagine they could even pull off.
You would say, how could they do that? Yeah. So the fact that a car's backed up, hung up, and somebody said it was a drunk driver, I'd say, okay, I'd buy that.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
they stop, they're drinking, they throw it in reverse, and who knows? But
of course, he doesn't know. She only drove a mile up the road or whatever.
You're up in the middle of Vermont where there's very little
There's nothing.
crime like that. So your natural assumption is going to be something that happens all the time, which is drunk drivers. So.
Which he saw the checks and went to the lantern. The lantern was closed.
Yep.
Yeah. So he may think she's working there. She drank after work, during work. Yeah, which is an unheard of at restaurants.
And you're talking about the officer who arrived who towed the car.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that weird to you when you just said that you think
I think it's odd.
You think it's strange that the officer who arrived saw all of these like markers of foul play and then towed the car away from a potential crime scene, but then he uses his detective skills and finds the checks and...
Well, they're right there on the front seat.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is, like, so wasn't the broken necklace.
Does he think he's going to bust a drunk driver?
Like that's where he went? That's where his head went? Opposed to, like...
I think it's odd.
It is odd.
I would think that was crazy, but you never know.
I'm not trying to suggest some sort of conspiracy. I'm just saying it's...
Northern Vermont, I think that happens more often than you'd think, where somebody gets in a car accident, there's no police around, a car comes by, they flag them down, jump in the car, they go home, I'll deal with it tomorrow.
Sure. Yeah, we talk about that all the time.
Yeah, I don't think it's an unusual occurrence up there. So I think, it's too bad that he necessarily jumped to that assumption, but I can understand why he did. And unfortunately, in my mind, she could have been wandering around with a head injury had it been an accident. Or,
that was what came up with Maura with the cracked windshield is that would be my first concern is someone's out there with a head injury and she's wandering the roads. And if she did have a head injury, she could have wandered off into the woods. Of course, there's no tracks or anything like that. But
Yep.
All right, well, Jeff here asks, has the DEA or ATF ever had any involvement considering 2 known drug dealers were named as possible suspects? I know the FBI played a limited role. Couldn't somebody be pressured into talking? This case might be better served by an authority higher than local/state police.
We had talked about this in the car. So initially, do you remember when, or looking back, do you remember the police actually went to, Vermont State Police went to New Hampshire, and they had a meeting to see if they thought that Maura's case was related to Brianna's.
Yep.
So they came out publicly and said, what would you call that, just a statement release, or it wasn't a conference?
It was like a statement, yeah.
Yeah, and they came out and they said, no, we don't believe that these two things are related. And but the FBI was present then. I think they didn't say anything. They were just there. They had listened and complied, or were present when the discussions took place and stuff like that.
Well, ATF wouldn't have any jurisdiction. DEA, I mean, even though for up there these guys are sizable dealers, in the big picture of DEA, they're not anyone probably that's going to fall under their radar necessarily. So, and they're not going to get involved in a missing persons case just because of someone who might have a drug angle to it. So
this was my question to Lou: is what's that threshold
for the FBI?
Yeah,
for the FBI to get involved in a case, first of all, if there's an interstate aspect to it, they have jurisdiction. If it's obviously terrorism, they have jurisdiction. If it's a matter of federal employee, they would have jurisdiction. Other than that, they don't have jurisdiction over local crimes. In order for them to get involved in a case, they'd have to be invited in to the case, and they would offer resources to the agencies that needed them. And in this case, I think once they determined there was no connection, that interstate connection there, I see no reason why the FBI would get involved. They have their own cases to work, Plus, they're not a magic agency. I mean, they don't come in and solve a case. I mean,
snap their fingers.
Suddenly everything's okay.
Everybody says, the FBI should come in and solve it. The FBI is a great organization, but
But they would offer specific things that were needed
if necessary. Question
if they were asked.
State, maybe if they were asked, or lab assistance, or things like that. I've worked with FBI agents before, and a great organization, like I said, but they don't come to you and say, "Hey, can we help you?" Usually, it's you got to ask them.
If that person that asked the question was from that area, they probably are familiar with the fact that police presence is so sparse, and that's why But
that's why you have the state police,
Right. And just to be clear, what does DEA stand for?
Drug
Enforcement Administration. Sorry.
Okay. And what is
You're
and
the
what
law
does
guy. No.
ATF stand for?
Alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and
Okay.
explosives, actually. It's ATF.
I think what confuses some people is what they see on television, and including maybe even dramatic reenactments of things that have actually happened in the world, like the ATF was involved with the David Koresh thing in Waco. So that was, and
It had to meet a certain threshold.
it had to meet a
It's
certain
firearms.
threshold.
Yeah.
Right, it's firearms, but
They have
you
jurisdiction
just see
over
like the
Illegal firearms that were there.
Well, any
and stuff.
firearms, there's federal laws that govern firearms, so the ATF has jurisdiction.
Oh, okay.
Same as DEA. There's narcotics are federally regulated. DEA has jurisdiction. But as far as other crimes go, unless there's an interstate aspect, they don't have homicides.
So
they don't have
if Maura's
jurisdiction.
case was right there on the border, right? Border of Vermont and New Hampshire, if something...
No, she was in.
it was
in
probably
That's
like
Connecticut
20 or
River.
so miles from the border of
Yeah.
Vermont.
Is it 20? Okay. But if they realized that something took place to do with that case in Vermont, would that meet the threshold?
Well, if she had been kidnapped in Vermont, say, and brought to New Hampshire, yeah, that would certainly be in it.
But not if she got gas in Vermont
no,
and then went
that's
back
not
to
an
No,
interstate
no.
connection.
No, right.
What if like a cell phone, if her cell phone is found in Vermont?
That sure that
That could be-
could tie it in. I
Okay.
guess. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Great question.
Here's one from Rebecca. She says, I guess I hate hearing it was drug related. Now, there is a difference with being a drug addict and knowing some people who sell drugs. And so Rebecca's asking, how can a person be on drugs and get a GED, work 2 jobs? She feels like the speculation about drugs take away from the focus of the case. Just wondering if you guys feel the same way.
Well, there's a lot of very high functioning drug addicts out there. Every drug addict isn't, laying in the gutter somewhere. I do not believe Brianna was a drug addict. Brianna may have used drugs, experimented with drugs, from what her friends say, but I don't think that plays a huge role, except perhaps it associated with her with people that she shouldn't have associated
It
with.
was recreational, but she was doing a lot more than we thought she was doing. All the kids up there were. And for some kids, that's where that split in the road comes, where some of them end up with problems, really bad problems, and some don't.
It's sad talking to her friends now, some of them, single moms, recovered or recovering
Yeah.
addicts or not. I mean, I talk,
Struggling. Babies having babies and
yeah.
missing out on an education and all that good stuff. Brianna, too, people don't give her credit for if she was a smart girl. I mean, she read like all the classics, literature, and all this stuff. Grew up without a television. She just entertained herself, but she was a smart girl.
Yeah, she was.
So she was athletic and stuff too. She was doing recreational drugs. It just she could do it, and she was a busy girl.
Yeah, and it was what was happening around her at the time, so it's not surprising that, you're talking about a 15-year-old child.
There
Some
was
people can keep up,
nothing else to do up
Nothing
there.
else to do, right.
Right. There had nothing else to do. There was no jobs
Yeah.
to speak of. I mean, she had to drive. Her jobs were, 30 miles apart from St. Albans to Montgomery. I mean,
Yeah, kids were saying if we want to go see a live band, we got to drive an hour to see a live band.
or movies even.
They're going to find something to do.
The other, the sad part, I think, is I interviewed a young lady, and her sister and Brianna were good friends. So her sister, who actually did contribute some information, wound up overdosing and dying about a year ago. And I just heard 2 weeks ago that the girl that I had interviewed, her sister, just got arrested, lost her kids, DCF's involved, all for drugs still. And she's in that same age group, So some of them got out of it, and some of them are leading a very good life now, and some of them never made it or haven't made it yet.
Yeah, and it's too bad to think that the reason why Brianna's case might not get as much attention as it deserves is because of the drug stigma that's attached to it.
Yeah, that initially, do you remember that? It was, I'm sure Bruce talked to you about it in the newspaper articles where the police came out and said she was involved in the drug culture and stuff.
Yeah.
And there was really nothing to prove that. And it was the whole thing where someone forgot to tell him that professionally, if you feel that way, that's fine, and keep it amongst yourself and your fellow investigators, but you don't tell the newspaper that. It's not something you tell the newspaper. And they ended up getting a retraction from him and stuff like that, but that forever kind of stuck.
Yeah, and it's too bad because it tends to, I guess, in the mind of the public, almost say, well, it's understandable. No wonder that happened to her or something. It's really irrelevant whether she was on drugs or not on drugs. She's a 17-year-old girl, for God's sakes, who got something tragic happened to, apparently. So her lifestyle may have contributed to it by association, but not directly.
And Lynn's here has a lot of questions. We'll just go through them one at a time. They're great questions. But the first one is, my understanding is that Brianna was not at her jobs long. Was her GED program full-time? Was she working part-time during it? And where were her last 2 or 3 residences? The information on this has seemed a bit patchy to me.
Okay,
it's confusing.
She had just started work at St. Albans at
KJ's
Diner. In fact, she may have worked one shift or may have been her first shift the next day.
No, it was. I thought it was a little longer than that. 'Cause someone had broken into her car there.
That's right.
On 2 occasions,
right.
but it wasn't long.
Right.
And
a couple weeks, maybe.
And the Lantern wasn't, 2 weeks?
She was on her third shift, I think, the third week at the Lantern. Because there were 2 paychecks in the car.
And they paid every other week or something?
I think they paid every week.
Oh, okay.
But there's a delay. So
those
were her first 2 checks. So she hadn't been working hardly at all. She had finished her GED program.
I don't know if it was full or part-time.
I don't know if it was full or part-time. And as far as her residence goes, she had been living with her friend Jillian for a while, a few weeks, a month maybe. Prior to that, she'd been at some point living in her car in what they call couch surfing, friend to friend to friend. She lived with Katie for a while. She lived with boyfriend for a while.
I had asked Bruce about that recently, and he goes, you know what? He goes, the places she had stayed shortly before Jillian, he goes, one of them was an ex-boyfriend, but it's I know it's hard to understand for a listener who wants all the information and stuff like that, but there's a point in time when you start kind of considering that minutia. It's just not, it wasn't relevant. We knew that, and we moved on. You can only fit so much info in the vault, so you kind of let that stuff go. So I always have to ask again or look it up. But there was a boyfriend she was staying with for a while that was a real good kid, and Bruce said there's nothing there. There was no issue there or anything like that.
Okay, and that wasn't the ex-boyfriend, James?
No.
Okay, and Lynn's has a question about James. And she says, what time did the ex-boyfriend, James, really see her car, and did he turn off the lights and close the door? And what did he think her car was doing there? I guess we can't answer that one.
James has apparently, over the years, told a number of different stories. And the state police have interviewed him several times. I interviewed him probably summer before last and first got involved in the case. And he told me that he had originally lied to the state police about what time he came by. He had told them he was up in Canada and had come across the border, and which didn't make a lot of sense to me because I think back then even they were keeping track of who came across the border and when they came across the border. But anyways, maybe not. I mean, it's a small border crossing, so and some of them close at midnight. So, but anyways, he said he came back. And he originally told the state police he went by at 2:30, saw a car, wasn't sure it was hers, kept going. He told me that was a lie. He had been at another individual's house doing crack, and he was coming by at 4:30 in the morning, saw her car, the lights were on, doors open. He stopped, shut off the lights, shut the doors, and went home. So I assume that's the true story. I don't know why he would lie about it to me at this point, but, so he's given several versions, and he's, I believe, told the state police that story also after the fact.
Okay. And so it's just those 2 stories?
I don't know if there's more or not. I was told that he's said a lot of different things, but, he came across as being sincere. I don't think he was being deceptive at all.
Okay. That's good to know. And I guess you can see why the first story might come out of his mouth, right, if he's doing something illegal.
Especially close in time.
Not only that, but he touched the vehicle.
Right. And it's easily proven, like as you said, that it wasn't true that he was in Canada and came back,
you would think,
right?
yeah.
So they might have had that info on him.
You think if you were going to give a lie for your alibi that you wouldn't, say I was in a casino or at a border crossing. There's bound to be cameras there.
Yeah.
Why even lie? Why just say I didn't see it? I mean, why tell the truth at all? If you're going to lie about it, say I didn't see the car.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Right.
I was home all night. I mean,
How old is he?
same age, roughly 30s now.
Oh, so he
dated
was
him on and
about
off.
like 17.
Say
or
18, 19, something like that. Yeah.
That goes back to the car thing too, and he said that he closed the doors. And there's pictures that I hadn't seen before that I saw when I did the show. Disappeared. They had pictures the police had given him, and it showed the window up and the door shut. Because I had always thought someone was throttling her or something, and she was gunning the engine to get away from him. It's a thought. If that was the case, it would make sense that her necklace had broken off. Somebody's reaching in the car trying to extract her from the car. And you think it's done in haste again because the lights are on and there was rumor that a blinker was on or something. So they took her out of the car quick. But those doors, I had a car like that actually years ago. I had a Cutlass, and those big old doors go out. If somebody was doing that and the door was open, it'd mow them down. It'd take them under the door. Yeah. So that kind of blows that idea. But he says that he shut both doors, right?
I'm pretty sure,
Yeah.
But, it's possible she tried to get out. They were at the door. She slid over the other side, opened the door. They went around, so it can happen.
Took off and ran, yeah. I think more importantly when you're talking about the car, and of course we all want to know what happened at that point, at that moment, you go through the different scenarios, and you can determine by the scenario, and there's only so many, that there has to be a way to get out of there. So there has to be a car. You can determine which ones need more than one person to do it, and the theories that someone ran her off the road. Cars don't argue with each other without making dents and stuff like that. You know what I mean? You're not going to push someone off the road without probably having some kind of damage. And she didn't. The damage she had was old. So.
And you don't force someone off the road and then have them back into a house.
Yeah, and then they run away. They would stay in the car and try to get away. Yeah. So you can go through that way and discount some of those.